In this episode of the Awakening Legacy podcast series, I have got the fabulous Mel Harris, who is going to be talking about her chapter in the book, which is called Footprints in the Sand. So I'm really looking forward to diving into this session. So welcome, Mel.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Thank you for the invite for the whole project. So thank you.
Oh, it's so great to have you as part of it and bring the aspect that you have brought to it through your chapter and through your experiences that you share so openly. It's fabulous. So my first question to you is, what attracted you to take part in this project?
Well, it was basically, I think, like all of us in modern day times, we're all encouraged to write a book or an ebook for our business. And everyone's always said to me, Mel, you should write. And I never seem to have had the space or the time or the inspiration to do so. And ironically, just as you approached me about this project, I had actually bought the book by, I think, Julia Andrews, The Artist's Way, to evolve that. Yeah, so literally that was a coincidence that happened in that moment in time. And so I thought, well, here's it's kind of like a synchronization. So why not take up the opportunity, and be supported, around with a group of people going through that journey. And you had done it so beautifully as well by actually preparing it with a publisher and actually taking us through the whole journey, which I didn't quite realize at the time, that it would be, not just the writing of the book, but going through this journey of understanding how to publish, how to promote, and how to present. So that was great in itself. And then when you gave me the title, it was very interesting because the title kind of inspired me as well, as you will know, Sarah, but the audience won't. I had been a businesswoman for many, many years, running my own business, working in the business world in different ways. But also been much on my spiritual journey. And about 8 years ago, I kind of stepped more fully into that. And I changed my whole lifestyle to embrace my beliefs in spirituality. And I guess the whole point of spirituality is it encourages you to contemplate life and what is life really about. That's what your spirituality is. It's answering those questions of who am I? Why am I here? Why does this happen to me? Why is the world the way it is? So all the different questions that you come up with. And in that contemplation, I've very much been on the journey of personal development. So I had been since the age of 20, doing the Anthony Robbins things. And that's where the first lines of What's Your Legacy comes in. And I was a trainer for Stephen Covey for the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And, there's a very famous chapter in there, when it's your 80th birthday. Originally, I think it was a funeral, and then they changed it to the 80th birthday to be a bit more positive. But, what would be the legacy you'd want to hear from all around you? What would you want to be hearing from your loved ones and the people around you? So legacy was kind of a big thing. It was already beginning to grow. It wasn't in business yet, but it was in the personal development world. And so I'd very much embraced that. And I'd gone on a huge journey of personal development. My consultancy was in leadership and team evolution and communication, all the behavioral aspects of growing in business and individually. But I also got on that journey myself with the Junior Chamber of Commerce in a very big way, an international organization for developing young leaders, where I was a president of the local organizations and an international trainer for them. And then when my spirituality had always been there in the background, but I started to take it more seriously, and it started making me think about this striving for legacy and what does that really mean from the spiritual journey. And that kind of shifted a lot of things for me in the way that I embrace life now. And therefore, yes, so legacy was a very interesting one. And I kind of realized as I was contemplating the title with you, actually it was quite relevant for a transition that I was going through in my life, both through my spiritual journey, but also as a woman entering into the more menopausal years. So there's a very specific transition for a woman at that time as well, which I could go into a little bit, but in the sense that, traditionally a woman is meant to go into retreat when she goes into the menopause, and it's meant to be a process for reviewing her life journey to this point and healing whatever's come up, and then moving on to being the wise woman. Doesn't mean she has to be any less juicy, just more wise. and bring that wisdom to the world. And so it was kind of very relevant from both those perspectives, because I was going through that journey and also the journey of my kind of spiritual awakening and evolution.
Yeah, well, it's good. Thank you for sharing that kind of, I suppose, the echo with your biological journey as well, and and what that brings, because I know that's not something you've actually talked about in your chapter. I mean, one of my questions actually is, what didn't you include, or what, in a chapter there's only so much you can write. And I don't know how you found this process, but for me, once you start writing a chapter, you realize, whoa, if you've been in a place before where you thought, I'm not sure I could write a whole book, once you write a chapter, you would start to realize how much you do have to say, how much you've experienced, how much there is to be expressed.
Yeah, exactly. What it was like, you need to bring that down to 3,000 words. You're like, oh my goodness me. What do I take out? What do I not take out?
Yeah.
Refining process, but it makes you realize that you actually have material to go and explore more in different areas. And then, of course, once you've written the chapter and you have time to reflect, then you suddenly realize there's more aspects to it. Like, actually, when I was writing the chapter, I didn't realize it synchronized with my menopausal journey. It was something that came in afterwards that I started to realize there was a reflection of that. Again, the beauty of contemplation and reflection, and giving oneself the time to have that. And yes, and that's when I kind of became aware that there's also a journey in that process as well.
Yeah, that so what kind of awakenings, you've talked a bit about that connection between what came out from those contemplations for you. Were there any surprises that came, or that's things that surprised you about the process?
Yes, the process in itself terrified me, because being a double Virgo, I'm guilty of charged of the negative trait of perfectionism. And therefore you want it to be really good, and you want it to be done well, not for you from that side of it, but for supporting all the other people that are writing the book, to make sure it's good enough to be there. And so I think what surprised me was, I realized I had a very unique style, which I didn't realize, which was quite poetic, a poetic form of integrating prose and a semi-form of poetry. And I was kind of like, oh, where did that come from? I didn't really, that kind of came out of me without, as you know, in the process of writing, once you find your space, it just starts to flow out of you. And I was like, oh, wow, where did that, come up from? Yes, that was very surprising for me in that process. The word, from what came up on the words of the page, I think it was you kind of realize that actually we all know journaling. I've journaled for years, and we all know it's a very powerful way of helping to sort the mind and to heal a little bit, and to sort your order of thoughts and things, and to reflect and review. But when you write a chapter like that, it's kind of interesting as well. You're kind of surprised at the level of depth of understanding that you framed, that you've never verbalized yourself outwardly,
Yes, yeah, that it is so interesting that, like you say, that depth of understanding that comes. So were there any things that you didn't include in your chapter, which you thought, oh, it would have been really nice to include had you had a bit more space?
Yes, my goodness me, completely, because it's like, I'm talking from, so if someone hasn't actually stepped out onto spirituality, who has maybe stepped into more what I call the beginnings of the journey of spirituality. It's a bit more, all the positive affirmations and everything's very positive, and step into the heart. When you step onto the real journey of true spirituality, you're diving really into your shadows, and you're going in to really clear out what you call negative karma that you've gathered and accrued over your journey. And in my spiritual pathway of Tantra, it's very much believed that you have reincarnated many times, And it's also the Buddhist belief as well that you reincarnate and that you cycle through, and because of that you're carrying karma through from other journeys. And so when you go into a journey of spirituality, you're going through, you actually then start to set, so at first it starts to help to balance you and harmonize you and change your perspectives. But then if you choose to, you can go beyond that into a deeper level. And that's purification, if you like, or how we term it, purification, where you really start to go in deep and energetically start to remove all the traumas, all the doubts and fears and insecurities from within your being, but energetically, which you can't do with talking therapies. I mean, I'm qualified as a psychotherapist, and I did psychology for 2 or 3 years at university, so that I know I'm an NLP practitioner, I'm a hypnotherapist, I've done that journey, I went through that journey. So you can rationalize and you can build some sense around it and find some balance in that and some understanding in it. And there are certain aspects you can release just by expressing things, absolutely, of course. But what I found is those deeper traumas and those deeper issues and challenges which we carry with us, and some of them, as I said, very subconscious, because they can come from past life or our ancestral heritage with our parents, our mothers. I remember I was doing a retreat and I was purifying, and I had a big purification around the eyes, which has all these purifications have meaning, where and why they're coming from. And I phoned up my mother. I was in India at the time, and I phoned her up about 5 or 6 days later, and she said, "Oh my goodness, I haven't been able to see properly for the last 5 days. My eyes have been blurry." And so there was a purification that was going on energetically from mother to daughter as well. And so it's in Tantra you learn about the profound makeup of your being as an energetic being, not just physical body and the mind, but of the many layers of the energy structure, and also how that relates to the universe around us, because as we know, everything is pure energy. So when I started writing the chapter, it can sound like I'm being a little bit, well, why do you want to create legacy? But it's not really, because that's part of the evolutionary journey of development. So you're childlike, you're in awe, amazed, then you go through the knocks and bashes that make you fearful or give you your insecurities or your doubts or your fears, whether that's from your family or the world around you, or just life, if you're experiencing life. And then we go into the stage of wanting to create. It's a way of finding ourselves. So this creating of the legacy normally comes out of pain. It doesn't normally come out of joy. It normally comes from a place of suffering, where you've had to peel back, layers of yourself, and you've had to see yourself. And then there's a desire to make a change, and with that change is like make an imprint, make a process. Now I feel that the word legacy can be a bit hijacked by the business community for pushing people forward to do their businesses and make their money and whatever in that way, whereas actually to me the legacy is, what's your gift? What's your gift you're bringing? It's a journey of self-realization, and it shouldn't be about thinking I want to leave the legacy. It should be about, how do I bring my gift to the world? And that naturally creates a legacy that's there. But the reality is, it's an existential question, isn't it? Because the reality is we're going to die. And again, we know from if you've done any counseling or psychotherapy, that we know that that's a big existential question, that the biggest driver for people is the fear of death. Having children is a way of overcoming that fear of death. Creating a huge legacy is a way of overcoming that fear of death. It was something very much that kings did. And I think I finished my chapter with the quote from Alexander the Great.
Yes.
He said, he conquered the world. He had women galore. He had whatever he wanted. He was one of the most successful empire builders ever, and at his deathbed, he asked his beloved general, his very loyal general who's by his side, to bury him with his hands outside of, to carry him to his burial position with the hands outside the coffin, and to show people that he was going, he was going with nothing. So he'd done all of this, but it was actually immaterial. He was still passing away. And I think, at that end, people start to realize what's important for themselves. And we know, again, when people are facing death, it's like, what's important? Suddenly, what's important to them disappears, and as in all the other noise disappears, and the relevance of what's really important to them. And it's like, it's not money, It's not success leaving that imprint. It's actually experiences and love,
connection.
Connection, yes, exactly. And
I mean, I love what you say about this. What gift are you bringing forth in your lifetime, and that's what creates your legacy. And because I think a lot of the message in this book, in your chapter and the other chapters, is that our legacies are happening now, every moment by moment, that it is that us remembering and reconnecting and coming home to our purpose, coming home to our gifts, that is, the journey is the, or can be the focus, rather than, it being so much about success, or those kind of trappings of success. I think, that
totally. And you kind of sorry, I just had a thought that came in my mind as you were speaking, that it's gone at the same time, but let me just take a moment to actually perceive it again. So yes, we're just sort of saying about this this gift and of being in the present moment, bringing that that forward. But it's I think in the journey of creating legacy, or just being in that, rather than having this desire to leave it. What I see with a lot of young people is there's a desire they want to be famous, they want to be rich. They see that as a legacy. Now it's come back to me what I wanted to say. And but it's it's not even about that, because actually you leave a legacy, as you said, in every moment, including the moments when you're in pain and you don't even realize. When you're going through a difficult stage in your journey, because you may actually enter into a state of vulnerability, you may engage with somebody in a way that you wouldn't normally, because you're there in that moment. And so you think you're a mess, you're going through a difficult time and you're struggling, but you speak to somebody really purely from the heart, authentically, and it hits them. And you can just change the whole way of thinking and being. So most people thinking legacy is success, and I'm showing I'm successful, I'm doing all of that. But it's not. It's actually how you empower another person, how you bring maybe a moment of compassion to them, a moment of kindness, an insight that helps them change how they're being. And you're not doing it consciously.
Do you know that what's just come into my mind as you were speaking is legacy happens in the messy moments.
Yes.
One of the things I talk about in my chapter, as you were speaking, and it just reminds me of how that pain, those difficulties opens up a whole other world that you know nothing about. Like, that's what happened for me. I hope it opened up, like, through experiencing grief, I hope it opened up a whole world of understanding what that even is. I didn't know, I didn't get. There are things in life we don't know, we can't get, we cannot perceive until we experience them. Absolutely. It's like balance. You can't explain to somebody what balance is. You feel what balance is. It's something that you experience that, and it's, there are these transitions that happen, or these awakening, I call them awakening moments, when you have this sense of awakening, when you're opened up into a whole other realm, really, of understanding and perceiving, and childbirth's a bit like that, it's like, and becoming a parent's like that, there are these, and
to completely and utterly. I mean, that's from a very early age. I think I found an old poem I'd written when I was about 16 or 17, and it was even already then saying, it's amazing you don't know what you don't know. It was maybe a bit later than that. I think I was 19 or 20, and it was heartache. It was my first heartbreak, but it's like, you don't know how you're damaging somebody or how to love somebody if you've had your own heartbroken. sometimes for many people. Some people just naturally know how to be very loving from the heart, but a lot of people hurt each other until they get to a point where they fall in love with somebody and their heart is broken, and then at that moment they understand what it means, being truly present and authentic and loyal to the person that you're with and respecting them means until that moment. So that's the first big one that we normally have as a young adult, growing up, is our first heartbreak, and then, as you say, grief. You can't understand grief until you've had to face it in some way. And it's like you say, the pain and anguish to somebody cannot be measured by the incident itself. You can have a young girl that has her doll taken away from her in a moment that's traumatizing for her, and that leaves her with a lifelong trauma. Whereas somebody else has been abandoned by a child, but the sense of trauma is still as great to the individual in that moment, even though they haven't had the experience of the worst kind, the other kind that's even worse. It's still very traumatizing in that moment. But you're right. I've got into two different things there. You have the expression of not understanding until you experience. And I think in this day and age, there's a huge amount of desire to download loads of information. You're in the information overload and overwhelm frame. And if I'm very honest, I would very happily be without. I know it's our modern day way of doing business, but I grew up the day where it was all word of mouth, and you did it and it was calmer and quieter and slower and more balanced. In today's world, everything's a very big rush and very big immediacy, and it's very distractive being online with everyone. But we're trying to live through other people's experiences rather than our own, and we're trying to judge the world through other people's experiences. And this idea of being very external now rather than internal is becoming a huge problem for people, because they're not growing up to know their inner reserve, their inner strength, their own experience, what that means for them, specifically them. And there's this huge need to judge themselves by what others are doing in the outside world. And I think that actually takes away from the innate creativity and actually can take people down the wrong pathway for their gift. It can also help them, don't get me wrong. It's, you can find other artists and come together in communities or whatever, but it can also make you focus far too much on what other people are doing rather than what you have to give, and actually losing sight of your gift because you're trying to emulate what other people are doing,
or have those comparisons, that comparisonitis that can come in from, especially with social media, with it being all the glossy magazine front cover of life, and
that's one of the issues I have with it, because it's almost like a false image, and everything's about authenticity, but then everything is done in this very highly glossy and way and whatever. So it's kind of like, where is the authenticity and how do you find that in that mass of things? But anyway, we're going off on
we are. I need to ask you, because I have you here, and I really do have to ask you because I'm sure people want to know about Tantra, because you mentioned that a big part of your spiritual practice, or your the philosophy that you follow is Tantra based. And of course, most people, when you hear the word Tantra, will think about sex, and I'm sure you get this all the time, but we need to just bust some myths here while we're here, because the word has come up. So I'm just like I feel it's important. And this is one of the things about this book, and I know there's not a lot about Tantra in your chapter, but people can find out more from you if they want to know more about that. But right now we've got an opportunity to bust some myths around that. Like, what is the essence of what Tantra is, and what it gives you in terms of a spiritual practice? It's quite big questions there.
Yeah, I would say what the essence of Tantra is for me is liberation. It's liberation and surrender. I sum up in kind of two words in the sense of what it means to me, because it is a journey of freeing yourself from all of the negative thought patterns and impurities, doubts and fears, very fully and very deeply, from a very deep level. It's a journey. It doesn't happen overnight. It's not going to be popular with most people, because it's not a pill that you can just take, or it's a happy feel good factor, because you're going to go into the shadows with it. You take it very seriously. You can do it So it's mild, or you can go as deep in Tantra as you want to. You can find God. I mean, Tantra was originally discovered or founded, or however you want to describe that word, because there were yogis that were meditating and going into much higher states of consciousness, and in those higher states of consciousness they eventually were able to connect with the universal consciousness of all of creation, however you want to call that, whether you're a Christian and call that God, or or you're a Muslim, or you are somebody that's a pagan, whatever. But it's believing in that there is a higher consciousness that created creation. And in their ability to go into very deep states of meditation, they were able to enter into the universal consciousness. And I don't mean the collective human consciousness, I mean beyond that. Carl Jung talked about the collective human consciousness, but it's beyond that. That's one level. There's, it's going into the universal consciousness. And from that, they understood how the whole of creation worked, and that everything is pure energy. Everything is pure energy, which science backs, but it's a deeper understanding of that structure of energy from a metaphysical understanding, rather than coming from our logical brains. And our logical brains are very limited to what we can see and perceive and prove or disprove. And then even in science, it's very funny, because in science they'll say no one can really prove or disprove, because there's always theories countering each other in science. It's maybe what the moment the main people in science at that moment choose to say is the way forward. I can say this because I was raised as a scientist. So I did my degree in medical microbiology and psychology. So that's where my background comes from. So that's what they did. And through that understanding, they developed a pathway for people to be able to start to evolve out of their human consciousness into higher states of consciousness, to realize their true nature, their soul self, their true nature. Our human state is governed by the ego. And unfortunately, we've lost the wisdom over centuries and centuries, not just years and years. We've lost the wisdom of understanding our true nature. So we're not educated in modern day time with understanding the vast potentiality of our being, both at the level of the mind and at the level of energy that we have. We kind of understand it, but we don't. And we have it very limited because we try to use the rational intellectual mind to formulate what is real and what isn't real. Whereas it's like when people say to me, what is Tantra? And it's like, well, actually Tantra is experiential. Right. So we're not asking you to believe in the universal, the creation of the universe and the fact that everything is energy. We'll say to you, here are a whole load of techniques, go and practice them, and you will start to discover that you are this incredible energetic being, and you will start to discover there is more to this life than you can see. What's the famous quote from Horatio? In Hamlet, I've forgotten, there's more that, more to the world than life can see. And there is, and we're very limited. And so we have a consciousness that is dominated by our ego, which we need to survive as human beings. But unfortunately, our ego rules us, and the ego is the cause of all of our suffering. So if we can manage our ego, if we can move beyond our ego, so that our mind, our true mind, not our intellectual mind, but our true mind is in control of the ego, then the ego is working for us as part of us, rather than taking us off on these merry dances. And so it's the ego that creates the stories of fear and doubt. It's the ego that gets traumatized. It's the ego that suffers. It's the ego that creates drama. And you start to understand why that is, and then through the structure of your energy system, how you can start to transcend these fears and doubts of your being. But it does mean that you go through moments of purification, because this stuff comes up and then you've got to be with it. And you've got to face, because you're actually taking off these masks, and you don't realize how many masks you've put on, and you don't realize how many walls you put across your heart, because you think you can be very loving and warm and open. Most people that meet me would say, gosh, Mel, you're a very warm and open and loving person. But oh my goodness me, I did not realize how I had actually encaged my heart so deeply through all the disappointments of my life journey, even though I'd had many beautiful experiences as well. But somehow we seem to hold those disappointments within us. And so it can be quite painful when they come to the surface, because we have to realize things at a deeper level about ourselves. But once we step through that, and we face the shadow of ourself, or the darkness of ourself, then we can bring light into that. We can bring the understanding in that, and we can release that. And I'm not talking about doing it with the mind. and understanding things verbally or intellectually, but I mean energetically, and allowing that experience to flood through and up and out and understand what it was all about. So that's why I say Tantra is a very liberating experience, but also because you can go to God with it. If you want to be very spiritual, you can go all the way to God with it, or you can take it as a journey of personal development and growth that brings you closer to true unconditional love and compassion. And when you're in the heart, when you're truly in the heart, which, you know, the new age people talk about, you know, being in the heart center and being in you know, in love and in compassion, but there is sometimes that's not real. Sometimes that's a more emotional aspect that we perceive as love, but it's not really coming from the heart. The heart, there is no ego. It's purely unconditional. There is no judgment. There's just total acceptance. And, you know, if there's any judgment at all, if you love me 3 potatoes and I love you 4 potatoes, and that's not good enough, you know, there's a contract always going on quite often, or you're not being well-behaved children, so I'm really upset with you. There is no conditional love, but there's still a contract always going on. That comes more from lower energy, what we call the sacral chakra, whereas the unconditional love is at the heart. And if you can reach to the heart level, you can free yourself from a huge amount of suffering, because you're not judging anymore. You're not judging yourself. You're not judging others. You're loving yourself. How can you truly love others when you don't truly love yourself? And, you know, this is a journey. I think learning to love yourself is actually truly a lifetime journey, you know.
Yeah.
Biggest gift you can give to yourself in this lifetime. Because
Amazing.
a lot of people can look very positive, but, you know, we're often masking, and we don't even realize we're masking ourselves. So that's what Tantra is to me. It's a very beautiful, very profound journey. It helps you to understand the way the world works, and you will change as you grow in it. You change your conscious perception, because the more you start to experience it, the more you see through the veils of illusion that ego creates for us. And then the higher and higher you go, the more you perceive things in a very different way. And that's very liberating. So that's what Tantra is for me. Yes, there are beautiful teachings about intimacy and relationship that can, and because it works with energy, it can change your whole lovemaking into a very profound experience, because you can work with energy and you can create orgasms, all kinds of parts of the body, because you understand your body as an energetic structure. So therefore, all orgasm is a beautiful wave of bliss traveling through your body. It's the union of the masculine and the feminine energies, which is God consciousness. So you're in the moment of orgasm, you're actually having a look into your soul self. You're actually meeting God in that moment of orgasm, when the male and female come together. So, and that's what Tantra works with, the masculine and feminine principles of the universe, not meaning man and woman, but the masculine and feminine principles of the universe, the positive and negative poles that create the flow of energy. When energy comes together, something beautiful happens, like light appears or an orgasm happens. So yes, so those teachings travel into your intimate relationships, and to be in a tantric relationship with somebody that's traveling that level of awareness creates a beautiful incubator for really discovering your true self in a loving and supporting way. But both of you have to be willing to go down that journey of unmasking and still being there to support each other. So yes, it has beautiful things, but people take the essence of that. So people have taken, oh, I see these videos with people being all bouncy with the tantric energy, and oh, I want to just go and do that, and it's tantric sex. And that's a very, very limited view of Tantra. It's like 5% of the teachings, and it's not all about sex. It's about this incredible growth, spiritual growth, personal growth, and reaching this deeper state of love and connection.
Great. Yeah. So, I mean, thank you for busting the myth around that it's, you know, that it is, you know, that aspect that people are familiar with is like that 5%, you know, and then you've got the 95%, right, of all the rest of it. And you know, you described it so eloquently. So, you know, I hope the listener has got a real sense of the expansiveness of Tantra from this part of our conversation. Wow, exciting. And yeah, and I think, you know, you obviously mention it in your chapter as well, and people can find out more about what you do and how you support people. And in your chapter, you know, when I read it, it was very much that journey in becoming, you know, in your awakening journey, those awakening moments through your life, you know, and our hope is that as people read this book, that it will support them in their awakening, you know. And you know, if people haven't listened to any of the other podcasts, you won't know that the name Awakening Legacy came after the creation. So, you know, we were working with this, with legacy and what it means to us, and all of that. And the name came out of the alchemy of the book, really, and the essence, the energy of the book. It's, you know, interesting to hear you talk about energy, because one of the big things that came for me from this book, it was that it has its own energy, you know, and it is part of the collaboration. The actual book is an energetic part of all of the pieces. Yeah. And all of, it's and that's been so interesting for me. And it was when I connected with that I was able to bring you here, you know, to be part of it, and all the collaborators, when I related to the book as as an energetic thing with its
that is, everything is living and breathing, because everything is a form of energy. So it's like this is, you know, it's like when people sort of laugh and they watch the Marvel comics and they see all the superheroes and whatever. Well, great yogis were capable of doing all those things because it's just energy, you know. And so yes, everything you do is a creation. Your thoughts are energy, your emotions are energy. So you are creating a book. Is your thoughts and emotions in a co-creative bundle from all the different people, so it has a life and an energy of its own. So absolutely, when you start to understand that, it's a very different way of creating and co-creating with people, and of being in the world, you know. And it takes, when you start understanding that, it takes the stresses out of the world as well. It starts to start focusing on, you know, what is the energy, you know, how do you develop your energy, your creativity, how do you harness that, how do you nurture it, you know, and embrace it? Because the minute we're stressing, the minute we're running around like headless chickens in the world around us, which is what causes most illness, is because we are not able to go into that creative space because we're running. You know, you know, all of us had to try and find space, didn't we, for writing the book? You went off to the cottage, and you know, I had to boot my partner out. Just like you have to create the space. And you know, and it's not just the sitting down to write, it's actually the headspace beforehand where you're pondering and thinking and contemplating before you even go to the written page. You know, what is it I even want to write about? What is this all about? What am I really entering into? So there's this, you know, we really need space, and I think that's the beautiful thing of this journey. It kind of, you have to create the space to do this journey, but it's also, that's where creation comes from, this energy can formulate into what it's meant to formulate into.
Wow, I think that's a great place to leave the listener today. So if you haven't already purchased your copy of Awakening Legacy, the link will be below. You can also get in contact and connect with Mel and the work that she does and the ways in which she supports people with their awakening journey, you know, and connecting with legacy and what life has to offer, and be living from a place of not just a physical existence, but an energetic one as well. So, well, we'll leave you there. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to hearing what you got from this episode of the Awakening Legacy podcast. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.